the next logical thing to do is to get information about a single user. So let's update our query type and let's just add user in here, and that is going to return a single user type. Okay, and the user type has an ID and has a name, as we know. So what do we need to do next? Well, we need to go ahead and have a resolver function for user. And the question is, of course, what is this function going to do? Because when we try to get a user, we need to specify which user to get. So how are we going to do that? Well, what we're going to do is pass in an argument to the query, and we're going to type in ID of type ID, which is going to be non-nullable. So we would have to specify this ID at all times. And remember, for our resolver function, we have a few parameters that we can access. And the order of the parameters is always the same. So it's going to be parent, arguments, context, and info. Now, we're not going to be using context and info, and therefore we can delete those. We're not going to be using parent either, but we need to specify this because it is the first parameter to the resolver function. So let's for now just print parent, and at this point I can tell you that it's going to be undefined, so nothing exciting, but let's also do a console log for arguments. So let's save our file and start the Apollo server. Let's go back to our playground, refresh this, and let's see what happens when I type in user ID 1, for example, and type in the name. Okay, so let hit run. We of course get null, but now if we go back in the console, as I said, we get undefined for the parent. So the parent will only have a value when there was another query that was resolved beforehand, like a root value or a parent value. But we don't have that, and later on we're going to take a look at that as well, of course. But what's exciting is that we have the ID here. Now, if you notice closely, the ID is returned as a string. We could specify, instead of the ID, we could specify this to be an integer. And in that case, if we just rerun this example, we get the ID back as a number. So for the time being, we're going to be sticking to an integer here purely because the IDs are also integers here. So there's a nice data value match that we can do here. So how do we extract the arguments? Well, I'm going to use this ES 2015 syntax of object destructuring, and I'm looking for the ID. So now if I just change my console log statement to ID, I should have the ID returned as an integer. Okay, so what do we do here then? We're going to create a variable called user, and we're going to do users.filter. So I'm going to use this filter method where we pass in this callback function, and then we can now access the ID equal to ID. So basically we're going to iterate through this users object of array, and we will find the element where the user.id is equal to the ID that gets passed in as a parameter. And let's just, for now, console log this out because I want to show you something. So we still won't get data, but what we get is an array that has a single object, right? This is how the filter method works in JavaScript. It filters through an array and it returns an array. Now, let's actually return this and see what we get in our playground. We in fact get an error. The error states that we cannot return null for non-nullable field user.name. So what is the problem? Well, the problem is that for our query, we specified that if someone is going to query for a single user, we want to return a user type. The user type has an ID and a name property. But this user and what we return here is actually, as you can see here, is an array. So that's denoted here by Visual Studio Code. And this is not good because we're not returning a list, we're not returning an array. We should be returning an object because that is what GraphQL is expecting. So since we know that for one user ID we have one user, we can just very safely return 0. We can return the first element of the array, which is then going to be, of course, the object. So let's save this, go back to the playground, and now we do get the right username. And if we change this, and we also get the ID, we now get the ID and the name of the second person. We can do the same for the third one as well. And if we do number 4, then we get null because we do not have a user with ID 4. So in this video, we had a look at how to extract a single user from our static dataset.